This next grand guest is one of the best reporters in the NFL. You know what? Scratch that. He's at the top, just like his San Francisco Giants in the baseball standings. He's done it all, from covering the Chargers at the San Diego Union Tribune to covering the NFL for ESPN, Sports Illustrated, and now he's doing great and big things at NFL Network. That is, of course, the great Jim Trotter. Jim, can I keep going with this introduction? You're also a proud Howard University alum, but how are you?
Man, I don't have any money left in my bank account to pay you for this. So, enough with the superlatives. I appreciate it, but man, I think you overhyped me a little bit. So I think what do we talk about? Coaches always talk about, undersell and over deliver. So I kind of like that.
No, Jim, you're always delivering. You're the right man to have this proper introduction. And speaking of Howard University, Jim, Fernando and I are going to be in the DC area in a couple of weeks for the Chargers Washington football team opener week 1. We got to ask you, any recommendations for food places out there in the DC area for us?
Dude, I haven't been back in a while, but I'm going to tell you, every Friday we used to eat at a place called Florida Avenue Grill. And we would have the fried catfish, macaroni and cheese. And you knew it was a soul food place because they made the Kool-Aid where they literally had this huge barrel. I mean, it wasn't even a bucket. It was like a barrel. And they'd have the Kool-Aid in there and then take sugar and just pour these huge bags in it. So, like, if you're diabetic, you don't want to have that. And they just mix it like with one of those big paddles. And but every Friday, that's where the sports information director, Ed Hill, is a friend of mine. We would go there to eat. So really, as a struggling student, that's all I could really afford. So I can't give you guys any of the highbrow places to go eat. I would be at Florida Avenue Grill, or I know the tourist spot is I think Ben's Chili, which I don't think I've ever eaten at, but Obama was there and whatnot. But yeah, for me, in terms of when I wasn't cooking for myself, it was Fridays at Florida Avenue Grill.
Wow, you know what? I want to check it out, Fernando. That sounds good to me. I got no problem with Kool-Aid. It's been a minute since I had Kool-Aid, but I grew up on it. Soul food is always good for me. So, Jim, thank you for that recommendation.
Bro, I hope it's still there. I came out in '86, so do the math for me. What is that, like 35 years or something?
Only
sounds right.
Only 15 years have passed by, Jim.
Not that long ago.
I feel you.
But Jim, before we get to know you a little better, I wanted to ask you about your stop at Chargers training camp. I saw you out there. You and Fernando got to catch up a little bit, and I read your great story on Derwin James. But what was kind of your biggest takeaway for being at Chargers training camp, and how was it talking to Derwin? Because every time I talk to him, and Fernando does as well, he's just excited to come back and play football after missing all of last year.
Yeah, I think you're right about him. Derwin is one of these unique and special individuals, in my opinion, who just have this infectious personality. And you can tell that the love that they have for what they do is genuine. It's not manufactured. As I wrote, he's not out there because of what the game can do for him. He's out there because he loves the game. He's one of those players, and obviously he would never do it, and I wouldn't expect him to. But, you say they would play it for free because they love it so much. And so that struck me about him. I had never really met him, spent any time with him before prior to that, but kind of felt like an old friend. And, I mentioned in a tweet that when I got there, some of the longtime Charger employees told me that this kid he's the first leader on defense who is actually the leader of the team, who has the respect of everybody, regardless of what side of the ball you're on, etc. The first since Junior Seau, which is a tremendous compliment, as you guys know. And when I talked to him, I could see he said that, and hear the stories about how he would hold people accountable, his teammates accountable. That's to it even more. So I'm excited to see what he can do. In my mind, he reminds me from a physical, even though he's not quite big, but just from a physical and the athleticism and the physicality of a Sean Taylor, who there aren't many players that I would compare to Sean. I think Derwin has that ability.
You grew close to Junior Seau.
Yeah.
During your time covering the team, and you even wrote a book about him after his tragic passing. What did Junior mean to you, and what did he mean to the city of San Diego?
Oh man, it would take your whole show for me to say what he meant for me. He meant everything. I tell this story that I would not be in the position I am today without him, because it was not. I know people think that because we were close, that he gave me all sorts of information. He never did. That wasn't Junior. He was not one of those guys who would rat out teammates or whatever. He protected the team at all times. What he did for me is I had never covered a professional locker room before on a daily basis. And what he did is he helped me understand the culture of a locker room. He helped me understand the culture of the NFL. So whenever I had questions about certain things, I could go to him and ask him about it. I'll give you, for instance, I'm early there as a beat writer, and we're in training camp, and the Chargers had spent a ton of money on this cornerback, trying to upgrade their pass defense. So we get to training camp, and this cornerback is awful. I mean, he's being beaten by all sorts of guys, including people who aren't even going to make the team. And so I'm thinking, okay, I got to get ready to write a story saying this guy's a bust. And so I go to talk to Junior, who's obviously the leader of the defense, leader of the team. And what he said to me is, pump the brakes. And I was like, what do you mean? He goes, you have to understand veteran players use training camp to work on their weaknesses, not their strengths. They want to try and prepare themselves for the regular season. Well, lo and behold, this cornerback goes out and leads the NFL in interceptions that year. It was Ryan McNeil. So imagine if I had just gone ahead and written that story, how foolish I would have looked, not only to the public, but also within that locker room where you lose credibility when you do things like that. So it was things like that that Junior really helped me with in terms of understanding how to be a beat writer, how to understand what athletes are thinking, sometimes how to approach them. And we had, we butted heads a couple of times, but ultimately we always came back to a meeting of the minds. But what's interesting is the first time he had that press conference about retiring, and he ultimately came back to play for the Patriots. After that press conference, he says, hey, some of us are going to meet at the restaurant tonight. He said, why don't you come by? So I said, okay. So I come by, and we're all seated outside. I'm going to guess there's maybe 8 of us. There's one of his physical therapists. There's me. There's people from his foundation. There are all these different people. And what was cool about it was everybody went around the table, and it wasn't planned or anything like that. And we just started talking about the impact that he had on our careers and our lives while he's sitting there. And so it was pretty cool to be able to give a guy his flowers while he's alive, to understand the impact that he had on so many people, because that was the thing about Junior, man. Like I say, he and Derwin James have that thing where when you meet them for the first time, they can make you feel like, you've been friends forever. And he truly, for all of the demons that he was dealing with, he truly tried to help other people and to make their lives better. And so for that, like I say, I'll forever be indebted to him. And I always say that I would not be in this position were it not for the help that he gave me.
Wow, what a story, Jim, and giving us memories of Junior Seau, and just so cool that he kind of was helping you along the way as a journalist. And it's kind of funny. It reminds me a little bit of when I spoke to Derwin James recently, and he was really happy to talk to me. And I asked him, like, Derwin, last time I was asking about a bunch of injuries, you kind of seemed fed up about the injury question. He's like, no, I know you have a job to do. People want to know about my comeback, and that's okay. We're going to take care of you guys. So to kind of see those stories and compared to Derwin was pretty cool for me right now thinking about that. But Jim, also having you on the show, thank you for coming on. But also I've been wanting to thank you because every time I see you on Twitter, you're pushing for diversity on the NFL, diversity and sports reporters, people who look like me and Fernando and yourself. But I feel like for a long time for me, I couldn't be comfortable, I guess on Twitter or in my writing, because we don't have the same advantages as other writers, being minorities. I guess for you, what did you kind of feel? When did you feel comfortable speaking out, and why did you decide to do that and be so outspoken about this topic?
Well, truthfully, I think when you go to an historically Black college and university, and I went to Howard, there are certain things that are sort of ingrained in you about where you fit in all of this and what some of your responsibilities are in all of this in terms of the fight for equity and equality and whatnot. And that said, you still have to get to a point where you feel comfortable doing it publicly, knowing what you're dealing with. You're stepping into newsrooms. Like when I was at the San Diego Union, there was never, in my 18 years there was never another Black who worked in the sports department, or sports writer, I should say, which, so, it can be seen as a lonely place. And you can feel like that there are people who don't, who aren't going to feel the same things that you feel. But I can honestly say to you where it really hit me, where I made a conscious decision of, you know what, I'm going to speak out on this at every opportunity I get, was truly after Colin Kaepernick took a knee. And I saw the way that people were twisting his message. And I saw the way that there were folks who didn't want to recognize what he was saying. And I just felt at that point, for whatever reason, that number one, I had paid my dues enough to be in a position to speak on it. I wasn't a young writer who had to be fearful of being fired and not getting another job. I felt like if I got fired for it, that I would find another job somewhere. I had put in enough work. So I felt comfortable that way. And then two, when I talk to particularly coaches and you see this sense of hopelessness in them, it was like, wow, this is powerful. Grown men who feel like, there's no hope for them to achieve the dreams that they have simply because of the color of their skin. It was like somebody's got to speak for them, and I just felt that at that point, I felt that I had rediscovered what my purpose was and what my passion was in this business and however many years I have left. And that was to be a voice for the voiceless. And I've tried to do that. And there are some who don't like it and always say, why do you always talk about race and whatnot? And my point was, I don't want to. And my hope is that we get to a point that I don't have to. But we're not at that point. And you can't look at the data and say that we're at that point. So I think Colin taking a knee kind of, at least for me, it kind of reawakened something in me and said, you have a larger responsibility. And if he could put his career on the line to do what he did, then the very least all of us could do is try and speak out on these issues that should be spoken about.
Yeah, no, well said, Jim. And again, I know you're using your platform to push for this, diversity. And I know it's still a long way to go, but to see you on NFL Network and just talking about it and getting people to get used to the conversation, or at least be comfortable talking about it, I think goes a long way. And like you mentioned, Jim, you've been around, this business, and people know who you are. But for you, going through ESPN, SI, NFL Network, all these big major media outlets, I guess what's kind of your biggest takeaway or biggest thing you've learned working for these big media outlets that, for journalists on their path, trying to get to a point where you are?
Oh man, that's a question that could take all day. But for the most part, I mean, and I'm going to be frank here, there really isn't a lot of difference other than the name that's on the check. We all do the same work. You got to have a work ethic. That's what this business is about first and foremost. If you're not willing to work hard, you're not going to make it. You have to be able to build relationships, which means you have to be trustworthy to the people that you cover and whatnot. And it doesn't mean that you agree on everything, but it means that they know. Like I pride myself on never being one of these ambush journalists. If I was going to say something negative or be critical of you, I'm going to come to you first and ask you about it and give you an opportunity to address it. So I always consider that even if they didn't like it, I would hope that they would respect that. But throughout all of these, it's simply doing the work. I mean, there are people who are at newspapers who could have my job and do it, I think, as well as I do it. The one thing I leave with students now that I talk to and whatnot is the business has changed from when I first got into it. When I first got into it, I do believe that it was more about the journalism. And many of the newspapers were family owned, that sort of thing. And now newspapers are owned, many of them by hedge funds and whatnot. And it's about the bottom line more than the journalism. And that being said, that means that there are a lot of quality journalists at times who are out on the street through no fault of their own, only because whoever owns that media outlet feels like their profit margins aren't what they want it to be. And that's infuriating, frustrating, disappointing, all those things. So the one thing I always try and impart to young journalists, I tell them those things, not because I don't want them to go into the business, but because if they're going to come into the business, I want them to do it with all the information that they can have. I want them to be able to make informed decisions about what they do. And one of the other things I always say to them is have a plan B. Always have an off front. I don't care if you're at NFL Network or you're at ESPN or you're at SI or the Orange County Register. Always have a plan B, because in today's climate, you could be laid off in a moment with no forewarning. And what are you going to do then? Here's a true story. I've only been laid off once in my life, and that was at Sports Illustrated. And for months, it had been having buyouts and layoffs because they were going to have an IPO. They were going to take the magazine public. So I'm in New York for the Super Bowl, and another email comes out saying they're going to have another round of buyouts and layoffs. So I go to my supervisor, and he basically says, you're okay. Don't worry about that. You cover the NFL, the number one beat on the paper, kind of bare bones. You're okay. So I'm like, okay. So what is that? The first week in February? Well, come March, I'm driving to the dentist. I'm pulling up to park and get a call from the office from the head guy. And I'm thinking we're getting ready to talk about a story or something, answer the phone. And the first thing I get is, hey, I got some bad news for you. And, we're going to have to lay you off. And it has nothing to do with performance or production. It's simply, in essence, you make too much money and we can hire two people for one. So all of a sudden I'm sitting there like, I didn't have a plan B. I never even thought seriously, once I was told I was okay, that I need to look for another job. But there I was, like other really talented people that I know who had found themselves in that position. So that's why I say to young people, and even older ones, if they haven't thought about it, always have yourself a plan B.
Yeah, no, and you know what, Gilbert, I was one of those kids that he told always have a plan B. In San Diego, to me, Jim Trotter was wow. So anytime he would speak, I would always go to events and stuff like that. And I remember you said that, and thanks to that, I got my master's in sports management, because like you said, you never know what could happen. So because of that, and I've always thought about that, I was like, you know what, I'm gonna go get my master's. And I got it at the University of San Francisco in sports management, because like you said, you never know what happens. So I thank you for that, for telling me that when I was younger, and that really, it hit home 100%.
Oh, cool. You're in a great situation, man. I thought about recently going back trying to get my master's, but I'm so old now, I'm not sure that I could go through with it.
Well, I mean, the USF program is pretty good, and they have a branch out in Orange County. That's how I got mine. It's once a week, so it wasn't that bad. But speaking of school and going back to school and all that, you sent out a tweet recently that you were going back to school for the first time in 35 years, but this time as a professor.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that? And look at that smile on your face. You seem excited about it.
I honestly am. I mean, it's funny. After first of all, it's at San Diego State.
Yeah.
And teaching a sports journalism class for upper division students. And it was funny, after the first class, a couple of the students came up to me and said, man, you don't know how excited we are about this class. And I said to them, I got to be honest with you. I'm more excited than you are. I said, because what happens is when you're in this business long enough, sometimes, I'm not going to say you get on cruise control, but you sometimes forget about, I don't even want to say forget, but you become a little numb and forget, there's that word again, about why you got into it and how you felt when you got into it, doing something that you had dreamed about as a child, being able to do it. And I told him, I said, I'm more excited than you all are, because what you all do is you invigorate me. You've brought enthusiasm back to me in terms of me trying to help you succeed in this business. Because the one thing I want out of this class is that, one, that these students get a lot of practical experience. So we're going to do a lot of writing on deadline. And I'm not interested in a lot of book theory and all that. They can get that in other classes. I want to really deal with things that you're going to face when you get out there. How do you go about constructing your story? What's your thought process? How do you handle yourself if you're in certain situations? And so we're going to go over all that sort of stuff, from the most basic things like that sometimes you don't even think about. To give you, for instance, let's say you get hired at a newspaper, your first job, you're going to be a prep writer, but you've never covered a prep event. So let's say you had been covering events at your college where they give you play-by-play and they give you stats. Well, if they send you out to a game on a Friday night, what's your play-by-play look like? What do your stats look like? What's the first thing you do when you get that assignment? For me, and I tell them my experience, first thing I do, or I did back then, is you find out who the teams are you're covering. You make your calls in terms of talking to the coach or whoever, do some interviews about the trends and who's doing what and who to watch and all that sort of stuff. But then what I do is I before the game, the day before, whatever, I drive out to the school to make sure I know how to get there. Because this was back in the day where they didn't have GPS on phones. We literally had to print out directions and read them as we're going. Or we had to use a Thomas Brothers, which you young people know nothing about, I'm sure.
I know MapQuest.
Yeah, exactly. See, but we didn't have that. But so I would drive to the event, and then I would want to find out, okay, if it's a big game, that means there's going to be traffic. How early do I have to leave to make sure I get there on time? Am I allowed to be on the sideline, or do I need to be in the press box? Who do I need to contact to make sure I know where I can be? Is there a hot spot where I can file my story after the game? All those sorts of little things that you may not think about, that if you show up there without having gone through some of that in your own mind, man, you're going to be in trouble. Particularly you're writing on deadline on a Friday night. So it's just little things like that we start with and work our way up to say, these are some of the things you're going to have to deal with. And I can't begin to tell you truly how excited I am about this class. And I'm hoping I have a positive impact on these students by the time they leave. I know they're going to have a positive impact on me, and it makes me better because I have to think. I have to go through all of this stuff in my head again that I'm doing. And I'm excited, man. I can't say that enough. I'm excited. I find even in my free time now, I'm going back reading journalism books and putting together, classwork and things that I want to touch on to make sure I don't forget with them. So it's going to be cool.
No,
one thing that I'm disappointed about is that there's only one female in the class. And again, referring to the need for diversity, I feel we need more women in sports, sports writing, sports broadcasting. So I'm disappointed that there's only one, and I'm disappointed that there are no blacks in the class. But my hope is that, this class will do well enough that as we go forward, we'll get more of them in there, because I do believe, as we were talking about earlier, that there is a need for greater diversity among our peers.
Well, I know 100% you're going to impact those kids because, like I told you, I would always try and find events that you were speaking at, and I was impacted when I was going through school. So 100%, I know these kids are in the right hands, and you're going to give them the best information possible. I tried to apply at SDSU. They denied me, so I wasn't able to take your class. I wish I could have. That would have been a lot of fun. I don't know if you'd like me though. I was the class clown, so I'd always be making jokes, and I don't think you would have liked that.
No,
so,
as long as you did the work, we'd have been fine.
I no doubt about it. But I have to ask you the hardest question you're gonna ever get asked in an interview, and that is best taco shop in San Diego.
For me, it's TJ Oyster Bar.
Oh wow!
Wow.
Yeah, down in the South Bay, they have smoked tuna tacos.
Oh, those are good.
Yeah, and a friend of mine is the one who took me there. And I've been hooked ever since. So, the funny thing is, like, I'll have friends come to town and whatnot. They'll be like, where should I go eat? Where should I go eat? And I'm like, I honestly don't know, because we travel so much.
Yeah.
When I get home, I just want a home cooked meal.
Yeah.
I don't go out and eat, So for me to get to TJ Oyster Bar, for instance, it's because a friend after we played golf was like, let's go have lunch. And he took me there. And that's how I found out about it. That and Hector's Morisco.
Oh, that's another good one.
That's another one that I enjoy. But short of those two, I don't go out to eat much when I'm in San Diego. I'm always that guy who's asking people in other cities, where should I go?
Yeah, no, that's that's awesome. I'm 100% with you. TJ Oyster Bar is just right down the street from me, so I've been telling Gilbert when he comes down here, he needs to. I'm gonna have a lot of places for him to go out and eat.
I'm surprised he didn't ask you about the California burrito, Jim. He's asking everybody that comes on the show a Cali burrito.
Wait, say that again. Where is it?
Have you ever had the California burrito?
From where? Is that the name of the place?
No, Lolita's.
No, I've eaten at Lolita's, but I've never had the California burrito.
Oh my God, I need to get you on that. I'm gonna tell you now. It's a tortilla, French fries, cheese, carne asada, and guac.
See, you've already failed because one, I don't eat guac.
Hey, I don't either.
I don't do sour cream.
You don't have to. You can ask for a plain.
See, and the other thing is, you got to understand. I just got off the Peloton bike about 34 minutes ago, man. So I'm trying to be good. So you're gonna get me in trouble with that.
Whenever I told Eric, I'm like, one day you, Jim, and I should go get a California burrito because I don't think Eric Williams has had one either. So I told him, I'm like, if you ever want to go, we should all go get a California burrito, and that'd be a good time.
Just hit me up. I'm up for it.
There you go, Gilbert. You're gonna have to make a trip down.
Hey, let's do it. I'm ready.
All right. I'm there. I'm there.
Yeah, there you go. We appreciate you taking the time and joining Compas on the Beat. Let me just tell you that the podcast that you and Steve Weish had, that inspired us to want to start our own podcast and start what we're doing. We're taking people through our experience and the way we see things and the way we've experienced everything. So we definitely appreciate you guys, and thank you so much for jumping on with us.
No, I think that's cool, man. Congrats to you too. It's I always say, look, you guys are like, you're unique. I was almost going to say you're snowflakes. There's no one else like you, but that snowflake has a bad connotation. So, but you two are unique. So always, and this is something I tell the students, you have to find your voice, and your voice is you. Be authentic. Don't try and be anyone else. You can respect and admire the work of other people, but be you. And ultimately, that's what's going to resonate with fans. So, or with the audience. So props to you both for doing it. I think that's cool. Actually, this is one of the more fun podcasts I've done because we didn't have to sit and talk just NFL, and there, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. I'm just saying that one of the ways that I'll tell you a story. This is another journalism story I told before we get out of here real quick.
Yeah.
There's something that I call pack journalism. And I asked them, do you know what that is? And many of them didn't. I said, what it is to me is where you see these groups of reporters that go from player to player to player or to coach, all as one. And I said, to me, that's something very early on I learned I didn't want to do. What I try and do is let them all go do that. And then to try and find something fresh and different, I go and I talk to whoever by myself, whether it's an offensive lineman, a receiver, a defensive back, whoever. And when they're done with the star player or whatever, then I can circle back around and hopefully have a fresh conversation. And so that's what your show can do for you all in terms of you obviously see things from your own perspective, your unique perspective, and you're able to give that to your audience. And I would say do that. And it's no different from when you're out covering that team. Try and get away a little bit, try and do your one-on-one things. It's harder in this pandemic, that sort of thing, but have something fresh. Because otherwise, if people are getting the same thing from everybody, it's like, what distinguishes you?
Yeah.
And I always say to the class and the audience, that doesn't mean put out clickbait, and it doesn't mean put out hot takes, which I hate. It's just trying to find a unique story or a different way to tell the story that others are also telling. And that's what brings people to you and will keep them coming back. and your uniqueness is what will keep people coming back to you all.
Yeah, and that's what we tried to do last year because it was hard during a pandemic year to do that. So when Justin Herbert had his first game, I reached out to his dad and wrote a story about how his dad and his mom found out. He's like, my wife was doing the dishes, and I yell, "Hey, he's going into the game!" And she like dropped a dish, ran in, and they watched him take on Kansas City. And then Gilbert reached out to you know how there was a narrative that supposedly Justin was standoffish and wasn't a leader. Well, he reached out to some of his teachers and asked, "Hey, is that true? Is he really like that?" And they're like, "No, he's just a different kind of human being." So that's what we tried to do last year. I think it really helped both of us see different angles, different things different ways to get stories. And that's really what it kind of helped do for both of us last year.
No, those are great ideas. I mean, it's not unlike, even with Derwin, not knowing much, everyone speaks in generalities. Okay, he's a great leader, he's a great player, he's like this. And what you try and do is get them to take you one step deeper. Like, okay, I need examples. I need I always say, put meat on the bone for me. So there was, I don't remember who told me about the incident on the field where they were short one defensive player and he kind of got on him, and to where I could go ask him about it. But it's things like that, or even Telesco, when I'm talking to him and he's giving me some examples and stuff like that, just try and go a little bit deeper beyond the surface, because the more detail you have, the more it separates you from everyone else. And sometimes you get it and sometimes you don't. It's that simple. I was in Arizona a few weeks back and talking to JJ Watt, and he's talking about, how he went back to his trainer from his defensive player of the year when he was winning defensive player of the year awards and whatnot. And so it would have been easy just to write it up and say him talking about it and whatnot. And I'm like, well, let me check in with this trainer. So you call him, and all of a sudden he gives you another viewpoint on it, where he's talking about having to convince JJ Watt that he's not broken, which is a psychological thing, not a physical thing. So it gives you a deeper dive into what's really going on. So I always say this, and I remind myself of this for young journalists all the times. Sometimes you'll say, do I want to make that one extra call? And let's say you've already made 5 or whatever, and you think you got enough. Do I really want to make that one extra call? And invariably, it's that one extra call that ends up getting you something that makes your story unique or special from everyone else's. So don't take shortcuts, do it the right way, and everything else will take care of itself. And always have a plan B.
That is awesome wisdom from the great Jim Trotter. Thank you so much again for joining us. We're excited to have you, and thank you so much.
We're gonna stop with this great thing, man. We're gonna stop with this great thing. I'm start having Brandon Staley or somebody fine you every time you.
I don't think I make as much as they do to get fined like that. So
that's all right. It'll be relative.